full body tracking is awesome. It's super immersive and brings a whole new way to play your favorite games like Blade and Sorcery, VR Chat, Beat Saber, and well, that's about it. But sadly, full body tracking can set you back a really pretty penny, even for some of the cheaper alternatives like Slime VR, Horror X, and Stonks. What I'm about to show you, in my opinion, is the best room scale full body tracking method for the same price as just one Vive tracker. This is a tutorial on PlayStation Move Service EX. Let's start with our parts list. You'll need 4 PlayStation 3 eye cameras, the amount of USB extension necessary to run around your playspace. You'll need 3 PlayStation motion controllers, 1 Bluetooth 4.0 adapter if you don't already have one. You'll need 3 mini USB cables to actually charge the controllers. So with all that, a total roughly comes out to about $125. This will fluctuate depending on where you are and the availability of everything in your area, but through eBay or most secondhand websites, you can get this stuff pretty cheap. Here's something really important about these controllers. If you want the best experience with PlayStation Move Service, you want the magnetometer enabled controllers. How you tell if they're magnetometer enabled controllers is by looking at the serial number. If the serial number starts with a 1, a 0, a 2, or a G, those are magnetometer enabled controllers. Now, you can use the magnetometer list versions, but it's heavily not recommended because of how many times you have to recenter the controllers while you're using them. In this case, this is a controller with 1 as the first number of its serial number, and that's how you tell this is a magnetometer enabled controller, and this is a good one. You can use this. But it's, like I said, heavily not recommended to use the PlayStation 4 versions or the PlayStation 3 versions that don't have a magnetometer in them, simply because of how inconvenient they are to use. Here's something to note with the cameras. You can use less than 4 cameras if you absolutely need to, but it's heavily not recommended. Another thing, you cannot use the PlayStation 4 VR camera with PlayStation Move Service EX because it's not supported yet. Okay, so the first thing we need to do before we start setting up any sorts of hardware is to download the PlayStation Move Service off GitHub. So click the link in the description and then scroll down to this set of assets right here, and we're going to download PlayStation Move Service.zip. The next thing we'll need to download is PlayStation Move Service Virtual Device Manager. This will also be linked in the description, and then you'll just need to download the PlayStation Move Service Virtual Device Manager.zip under assets, just like you did with the PlayStation Move Service EX. Okay, so firstly, you're going to plug all of your cameras into their USB extensions, and then you're going to plug those USB extensions into your PC. After you do that, we're going to run the PsmsEx Service Virtual Device Manager. You're going to scroll down, and then you're going to look for the PsmsEx Service Virtual Device Manager.exe right here. You're going to run this file, and then you're going to install your PlayStation Eye drivers. With that, now that we have PlayStation Move Service installed, we're going to open up the file folder, and we're going to run testing. We're going to run the testcamera.exe right here. And what you're going to do is once you get this once you get this window pulled up right here, you're going to type in your frame rate of your cameras. In this case, we'll just type in 30. And this is the part where you type in the resolution. So the initial resolution of these cameras is 640 by 480. So we will just put in 640 right there, and we will hit enter. So after you type in the resolution and hit enter, you should be met with all these little windows of your cameras. In this case, all of my cameras are already mounted, but I'm going to go through and show you how to mount them and the rules to follow when you're mounting them. So one of the main rules when you're mounting your cameras is you want your cameras to see as much play space as possible while still being able to see your hip from the other side of your room. So as you see, when I walk around my room, all of my cameras can see my hip from the other side while still being able to see the floor in front of them. So imagine if you had 2 trackers on your feet and 1 tracker on your hip, you wouldn't want to occlude your trackers just by walking out of your cameras' field of views. Okay, so now that we have everything camera-wise figured out for right now, we're going to grab our PlayStation 3 motion controller. We're going to grab a mini USB cable, and then we're going to start up PsmsEx Service. .exe. So we're gonna come down here, we're gonna open up PSmooth service admin because we're gonna be pairing a controller. And then we're gonna start at psmooth config tool.exe. Connect. Make sure you have Bluetooth on down here. And then you're gonna click controller settings. Now, I have 3 virtual controllers here. That doesn't matter for right now. I'll get into that later. But when you have nothing connected and doing this for the first time, there won't be anything in this window. So you're gonna take your controller, you're gonna plug it in, you're gonna click pair controller. Now we're gonna unplug it from the PSmooth, and we're gonna click the PlayStation button. See? Okay, now that everything's connected, we'll move on to the next step, which is going to be calibrating our magnetometer and gyroscope. So now that we have everything connected, all 3 of your controllers connected to your PC, we're going to go to the PSmooth service folder again. We're going to close everything that we were just using, closing config tool and PSmooth service admin. You're going to go to the PSmooth service folder, and you're just going to open up psmoothservice.exe right here. Then you're going to open up config tool, and then we're going to start calibrating these controllers. You're going to hit controller settings, then we're going to click calibration, and we're going to start with calibrate magnetometer. So what you need to calibrate your magnetometer is you'll need your controller and a flat surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the center of my playspace. I'm going to move the controller in a figure 8 until the software tells me that it's done calibrating. Then I'm going to set the controller down on my flat surface. And then I'm going to point the trigger in the forward direction of my playspace. And then we're going to click calibrate default orientation. We're going to let it sit and sample. And then once it's done, it'll pull you into a window to see your controller's orientation. Okay, so after you're done calibrating all of your controller's magnetometers, we're going to move on to calibrating the gyroscope. So how you calibrate the gyroscope is you take your controller, you set it down on your flat surface with the trigger facing to the forward direction of your playspace, and then you're just going to click calibrate gyroscope in the PlayStation Move Service config tool. You're going to let it sample, and then once it's done, you'll be pulled into a window to where you can see your controller's rotation. If it looks good, calibrate the rest of your controllers, and then we'll be on to calibrating our cameras. Here's one note before we start getting into calibrating cameras. Make sure all of your controllers have optical tracking on. Make sure all their position filters is low pass optical. All of their orientation filters is Magwick MARG. Now, you can experiment with Magwick MARG or complementary MARG because both of them have their ups and downs, but don't be worried about the rest of these filters because they don't really do much. You can also play with your prediction time and angular prediction time to improve controller responsiveness. Also, make sure your controllers are set to red, green, and blue. In this case, my controllers are set to yellow, magenta, and cyan just for an example. But with your controllers, set them to red, green, and blue, simply because these colors are the most fundamentally very different and you will not run into any tracking issues such as color collisions. Okay, our next step here is to start calibrating our controllers to our cameras. So we're going to go back to our main menu, click tracker settings, calibrate tracking colors, and then we're going to put all of our controllers in the middle of our play space to where all of our cameras can see them. Then we're going to click all 3 of these boxes right here. We're going to click automatic switch color, automatically switch controller, and automatically switch tracker. We're also going to change our color detection sensitivity to aggressive. And then we're just going to click automatically detect colors and just let it do its thing. Okay, so once it's finished, we're just going to click OK. Then we're going to run through all of our controllers and make sure all of them have their colors calibrated. Just going to run through all of them real quick. Calibrate all the tracking colors. Yeah, all of them are detected. Like I said, in this case, we're just going to be doing red, green, and blue. Yeah, looks good. Okay, so our next step to calibrating our tracker poses is we need to print out the calibration mat for PlayStation Move Service. So we need to go to the PlayStation Move Service folder. We go to Assets, we can go Calibration, Pose, and then here's all of our calibration mats. So you can either do it with one paper or you can do it with 4 papers. My personal recommendation is to do it with 4 papers instead of 1 because it gives you the best calibration instead of just using 1. If you don't have a printer, you can also just fold a paper into 4 sections so you can get a center point and then you can have the corners. This is what one calibration mat looks like. And this is what the 4 paper calibration mat looks like. So this is how you move the controller along the calibration mat. As you notice, I go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. The software will also tell you which point you have to put the controller on whilst you're calibrating. Keep in mind, this is just an example. I'm not actually calibrating camera pose just yet. So when you start calibrating your playspace, make sure that you select the setting you're using to calibrate. In my case, I'm using the 4-letter paper format. So if you're using 1-letter paper format, you select 1 letter or 1 A4 paper format. Otherwise, if you select the wrong paper type when you're calibrating, you'll have terrible calibration issues. Make sure when you're calibrating, you set on the same number that the software calls for. For example, when the software calls for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, make sure you set the controller on the corresponding number so you don't get any tracking issues, you don't have any position issues. And just let it do its thing. Once it's done sampling, it'll pull you into a menu so you can check your camera positions. And if everything looks good, we'll move on to passing these controllers into SteamVR. Keep in mind, you only have to do camera pose calibration 1 time, so you'll grab 1 controller, you'll run it along the calibration mat, and then once it pulls you into the menu to where you can see your controller being tracked in space, you're done calibrating your cameras. You don't have to calibrate it again with another controller. So our next thing after calibrating camera pose is we're going to go and set up Virtual Device Manager. We're going to open up our VDM folder that we downloaded earlier. We're going to launch PSmooth Service Virtual Device Manager.exe. I'd recommend pinning this to your taskbar because of how many times you'll be launching this, because every time you load into VR, you'll be loading up this program. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to Virtual Motion Tracker. We're going to go to Trackers. And we're going to add our trackers. We're going to add 3 trackers because we have 3 controllers. We're going to set each one to 0, 1, and 2 because this is our controller roles in PlayStation Move Service config tool. And then we're going to make sure all these are set to HTC Vive trackers, which they are. And we're going to save settings. And we're also going to auto start these trackers when VDM is launched. Okay, so our next step after setting up VDM is we're going to grab one of our controllers and we're going to grab our VR headset because our next bit of calibration and setup is going to be done in VR. Okay, so with PlayStation Move Service and PlayStation Move Service config tool open and running, we're going to make sure VDM is open as well, and then we're going to launch SteamVR. Okay. So what we're going to do now is in Virtual Device Manager, we're going to click run OSC server. And then it'll say OSC connected. And then as you can see, all of my cameras have showed up. And so have my controllers. They're right here. I'm gonna grab one. As you can see, it's being tracked in my hand. There's another one. This is my other controller. But as you can see, I'm holding them right next to my Quest controller, but they're not actually synced up yet. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to do something called playspace scale and playspace offset, so we can get our playspaces of the PlayStation Move service and the Quest 2 synced up together. It is also very recommended to be running ALVR with something called stage tracking, or virtual desktop with something called stage tracking, because it centers the headset to the playspace instead of the headset's direction when it turns on. So when you turn on your headset, you don't have to redo playspace scale every single time you get in VR. It's based off the Guardian. So when you turn on your headset, your Guardian's still the same. So when it turns on, all the controllers are centered to where they were last time. So you do not have to recenter and redo all of playspace offsets. Now, if you have a flavor of Steam VR tracked headset or outside in tracked headset, like a HTC Vive or a Rift CV1, you only have to do it once and you don't have to worry about stage tracking or anything. But soon there's something called PlaySpace Sync coming to the next version of Virtual Device Manager, so you don't have to worry about this at all. So the only thing you'll have to be worrying about is PlaySpace Scale, but I'm about to show you how to do that. Okay, so now we're going to start getting into PlaySpace Offsets and PlaySpace Scale. So your first step here is to launch config tool, go to tracker settings, and then go to PlaySpace Offsets down here. So your settings would be 0, 0, 0, and then 100, 100, and 100, or well, 1, 1, and 1. Mine have already been modified, but I'm gonna mess with them just to make this example. Okay, so grab your controller and you put it in the center of your play space. Here's my controller right here. What we're gonna do is you just set it down, and what we're gonna do is adjust it until it lines up. So set it on the ground. Don't worry about these right here. These are just trackers that don't exist right now. They don't do anything. But this is where my tracker is. Here's my bulb. Here's the Vive tracker. So what we're going to start by doing is offsetting it to the left or to the right because we're facing forward. We're just going to offset right a little bit until it lines roughly where it should be. So here's the bulb and here's the Vive tracker. These are in line with each other. Now, because the bulb is in front of the Vive tracker, we can move it forwards a little bit till it lines up. So bulb is above the Vive tracker, so Vive tracker is underneath the bulb, so we're just going to put this up a little bit. Oops. So in my case, they're pretty on top of each other, so I'm just going to move this up a little bit more. There we go. So I'm going to grab it and I'm going to check it. So here's my bulb, my Vive tracker. So it needs to move forwards just a little bit more. I'll put that at 39. So it's still a little bit close. Much better. That's where it should be. So Vive tracker, bulb match up. Now we're going to go on to PlaySpace Scale. So one more thing to note before we move on to scaling is we need to mess with the yaw direction of our playspace. So in my case, it moves perfectly forward and backward because I already had it set, but I'm going to show you what it looks like when it's not perfectly set. So let's say we have 90 degrees yaw here. It'll be perfectly fine in the center of your playspace, but when you walk forward, the tracker will shift off to the right or to the left depending on what orientation your playspace is in, but regardless, I'll show you how to fix it. So if it moves to the right or to the left, example, still moves to the right, regardless of what way you move, because your playspace is shifted that way. So how you fix it is you just play with your offset until it matches up to where it should be. So in my case, I already knew mine was supposed to be 94, but you play with your value until it moves perfectly forward and backward and left and right. But that's the pretty easy part. Now let's start getting into playspace scale. So this is what we do when you scale playspace. You have your controller in your right hand, your headset controller in your left hand, or whatever way you prefer. And then we're going to walk around with these controllers right next to each other and we'll see how they move compared to each other. So I'm going to walk from the left side of my playspace to the right side of my playspace. We're going to be focusing on the scale F and the scale X, left and right scale right there. So I'm going to hold my controller next to my bulb. As you can see, this is where the vibe tracker is and this is where the bulb is. It just shifted past it, so it's overshot a little bit. So obviously I'm just going to turn the left right scale down a little bit. We'll go 95. And as you can see, that matches up much better to where the bulb is compared to the vibe tracker in Steam. So I'm going to check it by holding my controller next to the bulb in the center of the bulb. I'm going to walk to the left of my playspace, excuse me. As you can see, it still overshoots a little bit. Goes from the left to the right. However, when you scale the playspace, it also affects the offsets. So we're just going to go back to the middle of the playspace. As you can see, the vibe tracker has shifted from the center of the bulb, so we're just going to offset it backwards. So in this case, I'm moving it to the right of my playspace. So we're just going to click right a few times. We'll do 19. So that's a lot better. So now the vibe tracker is centered in the bulb, and we're going to try walking across from the left to the right of our playspace again. So it's centered on the vibe tracker. And we're going to walk to the left. As you can see, that's pretty straight. Vibe tracker matches up with the bulb. Nice. So left and right is scaled and offset properly. Now we're going to focus on forward and backward scale. Follows the same concept. You grab your controller, you walk forwards in the forward direction of your playspace. So in my case, my controller has overshot. So this is my vibe tracker. This is my bulb. So we're just going to turn down our forward backward scale a little bit until it roughly matches up. $97. Looks pretty good. Now, like I said, because scale affects offsets, we're going to go back to the center of our room. We're going to adjust the tracker back to where it should be. So even though it's still pretty centered, it shifted off to the right a little bit. So we're just going to add one right there to the backwards. And we're going to check it again. We're going to move backwards in our play space. That stays very lined up. Here's the center of the vibe tracker and the bulb. And we're going to walk forward in our play space. And that stays pretty centered. We got the center of the vibe tracker and the center of the bulb right next to each other. Actually, no, I'm just gonna check that one more time. I'm gonna take it down on backward scale just a little bit. Check it moving left. Looks good. Check it moving right. Looks good. So now that we have left right scale and forward backward scale done, we're gonna do up down scale. So you do up down scale. It's like I said, follows the same concept. We're gonna set the controller on the ground to see where the vibe tracker sits compared to the bulb, which is fairly lined up. So the vibe tracker's sitting where it should be. We're just gonna lift it up. Vibe tracker, bulb. So what we need to do here, because the vibe tracker is undershooting a little bit, we're just gonna take our up down scale up by a little bit. We're gonna offset our upscale in position because, like I said, again, playspace scale affects offset. So we're just gonna move that down a little bit. So I'm gonna move upwards. Vibe tracker, bulb. So we're overshooting slightly. So I'm gonna make this 98. Check it again. They're both centered. We're gonna move it down. Okay, so the vibe tracker goes into the floor a little bit, and the bulb obviously can't do that. So how we're gonna fix that? We're gonna offset the Y up a little bit. We're gonna check it. Looks pretty good. Move upwards. Nice. Now, with our scale and offsets done, we're gonna compare our controller to our tracker. We're gonna walk around our playspace. We're gonna check how they move compared to each other. They should stay right next to each other the whole time, because I have offset and scaled the playspace to match with the Quest 2's playspace itself. As you can see, they match up perfectly as I walk around my playspace. Then we can move on to passing these controllers into whatever game we want to. So as of writing this video, a new virtual device manager update has dropped. This is the playspace sync update. This will basically give you guys that don't have a flavor of outside in tracked headsets or headsets that don't support stage tracking to sync up the headset's playspace with the PlayStation Move Service playspace so you don't have any tracking abnormalities. So I'm going to give you a quick tutorial on how to do that real quick because it's very simple. So you're going to grab your controller. As you can see, mine is not where it is. It's far off to the right. So what you're going to do is you're going to open up your virtual device manager. As you see, I'm in the virtual controllers tab under playspace calibration. What you're going to do is you're going to select your controller under the controller drop down menu. In my case, I have my second controller in my hand right now, so my controller ID is going to be 2. I'm going to grab my controller and I'm going to hold the bulb up to the front of my headset. So as I'm doing that, I'm going to sit on my knees because more cameras will be able to see the bulb when I'm on my knees and it'll give us a better calibration. So I'm going to sit on my knees real quick. I'm going to place the controller bulb as the bulb, or the vibe tracker's right here, but the bulb's in my hand is right here. I'm going to put the bulb on the front of my headset. I'm going to hit start playspace calibration. I'm going to let it sample for a sec. So once it hits stand still to sample the starting point, now I'm going to kind of walk forward a little bit and notice how the vibe tracker pops up right in front of my face because it's been calibrated. And that's it. It's right where it should be. It's just gonna work. It's a great update. I absolutely love it. Super time saving. Well, you know, it's really efficient. It works all the time. Works amazing, actually. Thank you to my friend Externet for implementing this. It's a huge time saver. You don't have to spend 9 years trying to calibrate and manually offset your playspace. And it helps if you do have some sort of playspace drift. It takes not only 5 seconds to recalibrate it, then you're good to go. Okay, so we're in VR. We're just going to calibrate our full body tracking. And we're going to put ourselves in a T-pose. And that's it. We've officially set up PlayStation Move Service. You've gone through everything. And, well, there you go. It's so cool. I don't really know how else to put it. If you have questions, please ask me. I will try my best to reply to all of them. And I do want to point out a couple things. So with headsets that aren't outside in tracked or use stage tracking, now they will work with the new sync update. However, every time you turn them off, you will have to resync the playspace to the headset, because when you wake it up, it won't point in the same direction that it pointed before it shut off, which doesn't really matter too much because the resyncing doesn't take too long anymore. Otherwise, that's pretty much it. You can use this however you like. Obviously, you can do whatever you want with it. It's super versatile. 90% of the time, you won't have to mess with it after you set it up for the first time. But occasional recalibration, especially with the controllers when the magnetometers start to change due to the environment, just recalibrate them, then they start working again. Same with the cameras. Sometimes cameras can move over time, and that can start to cause camera and tracking abnormalities like controller jitter and tracking jitter, stuff like that. So recalibrating playspace every once in a while, recalibrating controllers is kind of a normal thing you might want to start getting into, especially if you start using this like seriously. Other than that, thank you for watching. This is Bubbles, and I will see you in my next tutorial.